So I'm a botanist, obviously, and I have never worked on plants in New Mexico. My work has always been on tropical trees, mostly in South America. But during the past 15 years or so, during the summers when I was in Taos, I've been collecting plants because I like to collect plants. And after a couple of years of kind of random collecting plants, I decided to kind of concentrate on one group that is really difficult, and that would be more stimulating. And so tonight, I don't have a lot of clear answers about the genus Astragalus. I have a lot of questions, and I will mostly be talking about problems in identifying Astragalus species. I basically said that I like to collect plants, and I've got getting bored with collecting unknown plants, and decided to focus on Astragalus. They're difficult, there are quite a few species, and it would keep me busy, I thought. So the genus is large. It's one of the largest genera known, with about 3,000 species, mostly, fortunately, in Asia. Most species range from central Turkey, Iran, Afghanistan, Western China, and these smaller Central Asian republics. In the United States and Canada, there are about 360 species. That's about 1/10 of the total species number. And New Mexico has about 75 species. That still sounds like a manageable number, but it's still troublesome. So these species are not evenly distributed in northern New Mexico. So essentially the high plains, the eastern part of New Mexico, is relatively poor in species, but as you go further west, the number of species increases. To give you a kind of a numerical idea about it, there's a very large database that includes all identifications of specimens in southwestern United States, and you can search that database by Astragalus species and how many species have been reported from individual counties. So for instance, Colfax County had about, I guessed a little bit, 35 species, Taos about 41, and Riba 55. So there is a trend of going further westward than the number of species increases. These numbers I just cited are too high because the database is not entirely reliable. Some species have been entered under two names and so on. So that's the general outlook. Now, there are two common names going around for Astragalus species, milkvetch and locoweed. Of course, the locoweed species attract most attention, and the locoweed species can contain a poison called swansonine, which is very rare, actually. It also occurs in one genus in Australia. It occurs in Astragalus here and in Oxytropus. When animals eat too much of these plants, and they should eat them for a fairly length of time, a week or 2 weeks at a steady pace, they become ill, they become unsteady, like they stagger along, like they're drunk. They lose their appetite, and if they eat too much, then they can ultimately die. The number of species that contain that poison is not awfully large. But in northern New Mexico, and I go by Latin names of the plants, my profession, I'm used to the Latin names. So there is Bisulcatus, that is the two-grooved milkvetch. There is a Drummond's milkvetch. There is a Missouri milkvetch. and there is one called a stinking milkvetch because of poisons that it contains. And those are 3 species that are fairly common in northern New Mexico. In addition to that poison, Astragalus species can also contain a second poison, selenium compounds. And apparently the selenium compounds have an awkward, unpleasant smell. That's why one of the species that contains that poison is called stinking milkvetch. The number of species that have that are not very large. It's just the 2 grooved one and the stinking milkvetch. I think that's the Astragalus species that do not contain the poison are all called milkvetch. And actually a lot of species are really good food plants for cattle and horses. So the rumor has it that actually the species that contain poison are somewhat addictive. Once animals started eating them, they start to eat more and more of them, which is not very good for them. The selenium containing species have an unpleasant smell, as I mentioned, and it is mentioned in keys. The keys are always a problem with Astragalus, and so one of those problems that I have is the key is when the question is plants containing selenium or plants not containing selenium, or sometimes it says plants with a selenium odor or plants without a selenium odor. I don't know how selenium smells. I look at the key and I think, what do they mean with that? Why can't they ask me something that I can answer? So it's one of the problems with these plants. Let me see. I checked a number of, there are 3 floras that you can use for identifying plants in northern New Mexico. There is the Flora Neo-Mexicana, that's a little bit older. It has a lot of illustrations and it has a key, and I really like that book because it has illustrations of a large number of common species, and when I go out random collecting, I find always the most common species, so it's a very useful book. Then you have the Four Corners Flora, and then you have this final one that just came out. This is supposedly the new one. This covered all the plants in New Mexico, and in the introductions it tells you that you can take that with you in the field and identify plants. Can you imagine sitting down with this book trying to identify a grass? I mean, I don't understand that. So now we get with almost a serious problem with Astragalus. It's a difficult genus because it is such a large genus, and later on I can say some more about that. But I forgot to mention I mentioned these 3 floras. 2 of the 3 floras I give you common names. This thick one and the Four Corners Flora. None of those flora mention the name locoweed. So in the floras, it's not known. Outside the floras, people who are ranchers and deal with animals, they know there are locoweeds, and they probably name them. But in the floras, no. Even the one species that has actually 2 poisons, it's still called stinking but milkvetch, not stinking locoweed or anything like that. So you run into the keys. It's a means to try to identify your specimens. And so you have to look at the plants. Now, there is not so much variation in the flowers. They differ a little bit in color, and they basically differ somewhat in size. There are species with small and with larger flowers, but that's not really a big help. And second, widely used question in keys is about the stipules. At the base of the stem of the leaves, there are two stipules. They're really small, kind of leaf-like flaps of tissue. Normally there is one on each side of the stem of the leaf. But in some species they enlarge and they start growing out and they start growing all the way around, and they can be confused, and then they can form a little tube. So whether the stipules are small and free or whether they're fused in a tube is a very important question asked for in the key. That overlooks the fact that there are quite a few species where the stipules are larger and they're more or less growing around the stem, but they're not quite fused, and if they're fused they don't really form a short tube. So you never know if you have the question stipules free or fused in the sheet and you have something in between, where to go. People then ignore it and take both leads, which doesn't help you in identification. Now, another difficult character I find is the pubescence. You know, this is an easy pubescence character, like the hairs are flat, oppressed, or they are erect and spreading. You can see that easily. A more difficult one is these hairs can be attached at the very base, which is what you would expect. But in some species, the hairs are attached to the leaf or the stem somewhere in the middle, so they have two free ends. When you have a leaf or a stem with relatively few hairs, you can see that. But many of these species have a lot of hairs. The hairs are exceedingly dense, and it's very hard to find out if an individual hair is attached on the base or somewhere in the middle. Or to put it differently, I cannot do that. I cannot, when there are a lot of hairs, I give up on that character. And then the final, even more complicating question are the fruits. The fruits are exceedingly important in the genus, and actually, if you have a specimen with flowers and you don't have fruit, it's pretty much impossible to identify. Then basically, since it's in the pea family, the standard fruit is like a pea. I don't want to knock this down. Basically, it has this shape. United on the base, the valves go up and you have a row of seeds in the middle. That's pattern A, but in some species the base becomes wider and the pod becomes a little bit triangular in cross section. Okay, and then another thing is in some species there is a septum growing up from the base to the top, and it divides the pod into two halves, and then the pod becomes bilocular. That's a very important character to look at, and unfortunately it doesn't always work, because there are species where the septum grows a little bit up but doesn't quite go to the top. And so what do you do with that? I mean, do you call that unilocular or bilocular? And that also is reflected in that problem is reflected in the keys and the descriptions. There is a species, I think, that is the stinking milkvetch. In that flora, it says that the fruits are bilocular. But if you look at the Four Corners flora, they say the fruits are unilocular. And they're talking about the same species. It's a common species, and I don't doubt that the specimens they look at are correctly identified. So a big problem with these plants is you have all those intermediate characters. All the characters dealing with the fruits are whether the pods are spreading, are erect, they are oppressed, they are curved, they are glabrous, they are pubescent, sometimes they are inflated like a little ball with a very thin papery wall. And so after having said all this, you might wonder, so how do I identify these plants? And in most cases, I have to say I don't. I have managed to identify a couple of species with the keys. Sometimes you stumble across an illustration and you say, that's the one. That gives you another name. And sometimes I've sent specimens to other botanists in New Mexico who know the flora better than I do. But other botanists have their own projects, and they don't sit and wait for a couple of specimens that I send them. So sometimes you get an answer and sometimes not. I mean, I do the same. When I work on a group of species, say from Ecuador, and someone sends me a specimen from Guatemala, I'm not going to stop my work on Ecuador and say, I have to deal with this thing from Guatemala. It goes in the stack of specimens to be dealt with later. So that's what you do with, I think that's what most specialists do. If they recognize it, they say, oh yeah, that's easy, this is the name. And if they don't recognize it, they say, well, it's in a pile for later work. So, yeah. Yeah. Actually, a very handy publication, of which I only brought the front page. I put it down here. It's a brochure from UNM in Albuquerque, and it's a guide to the, let me get my glasses here, to the common locoweeds and milkvetches of New Mexico. It gives a key to a number of the most common species, and there are good illustrations, and there is an interesting introduction about the various poisons that these plants have. So if you are interested, you can Google it. Just Google Astragalus, New Mexico, and you get a number of hits, and you take this one. It's 48 pages long, so I did not print it out. There are good illustrations in it. So you might wonder, why would you get more species by going westward and not going eastward? Because east of the Mississippi, there are not very many species of Astragalus. If you look at the tall grass, the short grass prairies in eastern New Mexico, that's a habitat that goes all the way north well into Canada. And the soil types are fairly homogeneous, so there is not much variation in habitat. So you get in that area a number of really widespread species. For instance, since I've worked in St. Louis in Missouri, I thought that the Missouri milkvetch had something to do with the state of Missouri. It does not. It was collected a long time ago on the headwaters of the Missouri, somewhere way north of here. I think, I'm not even sure which state, because in those days there were no states yet. So there are a number of those, like Drummond's milkvetch, likewise goes all the way well into Canada. But as you go further west, you come into Taos County. Here you have the Sangre de Cristo Mountains, and then you have the volcanic range, and then you have sandy soils, you have clay soils. There's a great deal of variation, and a lot of Astragalus species only grow in one very specific soil type. If it's not there, then the plant is not there. A colleague of mine has been studying for 15 years a very rare species of Astragalus in New Mexico and Arkansas. It only grows in glades. Glades are clearings in the normal forest that have a very shallow soil layer. But you have different kinds of glades. You have limestone glades, you have other kind of glades. So they found out that this species grows only on one specific glade. But say a limestone glade. But then I found out that two kinds of limestone glades that differ in minute details, and that species will only grow in one of the two. It will not grow in the other one. They have transplanted it, they have seeded it, I won't do it. So the same you have here. You have a number of species that are really restricted to one particular substrate, like for instance, west of Guyana, there is a forestry road that ends in a bit of badlands, which is essentially barren clay with some scattered plants in there. So there's a species of Astragalus that I've only seen there. And likewise, the road that goes to the Christ in the Desert Monastery, there are two species of Astragalus that grow there that I have not seen elsewhere. And there is another funny species that grows near the Harding mine. I have not seen it elsewhere either. So the greater the number of soil types, the greater the number of species of Astragalus that you can expect. Now, when I started to be looking for Astragalus, I noticed there are a number of species that are fairly tall, that can grow 2 feet tall, and they have kind of fairly well visible flowers. So those species you can see easily from the car when you drive over the road. And that's nice. I think I got a nice Astragalus. And then you realize everybody else who has been looking for plants driving over the road has seen these species too. So those are really common species. And basically, when I see species growing in the roadside that tall, I ignore it. I mean, I have them already. Of course, there is one really rare species that grows like that tall. You can see it from the road. And it's a very rare one. That's Ripley's milkvetch. And it only grows from Tres Piedras in a narrow belt, basically north to southern Colorado. So you can never be certain. A second group of species are the ones that stay low. They're kind of hidden between the rest of the vegetation. They can be kind of clambering stems, or they're a little bit spreading. Sometimes there are mat forming. Those are the ones you have to look for. You really have to go out and then start walking around and walking around and walking around. And then you find them, and then you discover those species are really difficult to identify. So a number of the specimens that I have here are things that I have collected. I don't know what they are. And I'm not sure that I will figure it ever out, because I still have my work on tropical trees. So actually what happens when I collect plants, I generally, if possible, I'll collect 2 specimens of each species. One goes in the herbarium in St. Louis, because that's where I work, and the other one goes to an herbarium in New Mexico. So I've sent specimens to Farmington, to M in Albuquerque, and to Las Cruces. So that kind of scatters all over the place. I send them to these places in the hope of getting deaths. And then sometimes it works and sometimes it doesn't. And then I want to say something about Oxytropus. That's a genus that is exceedingly similar to Astragalus. And there is a technical difference. And a pea flower has a flag on top, a keel in the middle, and it has 2 flags on the side. Now, in Astragalus species, the tips of the flags are blunt. And in Oxytropus, they have a sharp tip. That is the technical difference. So if you have good flowers, you can see it. But it's tedious. Now, there are only like very few species of Oxytropus in northern New Mexico. Some of them are very common, but there are not very many. And they all have the same habitat. They all have their leaves in a basal cluster, so they don't have an erect stem. The inflorescences are erect, and they stay erect. There are a number of Astragalus species also that have the leaves on very short stems that almost look like Oxytropus. But those species, when they have fruits, the fruits are resting on the ground. They're never standing straight up. So that is actually a very handy character to look at, much easier to see than looking for the tips of the keels in the flowers. And one of those oxytropic species, actually in Valle Vidal, is all over the place, but only in a good year, because like this year, it's a dry year, and you can go out and you can look for flowers, but you will not find very many. It's just too dry. And a lot of these Astragalus species, they're either, some of the species are annual, some of them are short-lived perennials, so they can survive in the form of seeds. When it gets wet again, they germinate and grow. Some of the more persistent perennial species have a large underground root crown. So I think those species survive by not sprouting, sending up sprouts from their root crown, and they stay in the ground under cover and also are waiting for more moisture when they start growing again. And that's basically the spoken part. Can you do the illustrations?
Okay, so you've been hearing Henk talk about the specimens he's collected, and those are keyed out, and to get a true identification, or as he said, a suggestion for identification, because every key is different, you don't know exactly what you're looking at, but you need to have the physical specimen there so you can look at all the parts. What I'm going to show you here is based on photographs that I've taken in the Taos areas of different species and entered into iNaturalist. So if you use iNaturalist, you'll know it's not only a plant identification app, but the second part of it that makes it somewhat reliable, not completely reliable, but somewhat reliable, is that in order to make it a research grade observation, someone else has to approve it. And they would like 2 other people to approve it. So I've been lucky enough to enter some of these photographs and just say, Astragalus, what do you think it is? And there are experts around the world who do nothing but identifications of the observations. And so there's a man in Canada, in Edmonton, Canada, who is the #1 identifier for iNaturalist for Fabiaceae, the family that Astragalus is in. But he can only do so much without looking at all the parts of the plant. As Henk was talking about, the stipules on the stem, I mean, you've got to look at every part. And so flowers don't always tell you the whole story. So I give you that caveat as I'm going through here, but I just threw these together last night and today to just give you an idea. So this is Taos milkvetch, which is a variety of the Astragalus punaceus, I guess. And it's considered a rare plant. So the state of New Mexico last year did a study. Jan Martinson was part of it. Rachel Dankovitz from our chapter was part of it. And they went out looking for these. And of course, it was a dry year last year too. But I have pictures, oops, I don't want to go that far yet, from various places from 23 and one from 24 showing these. And so these observations make it possible for those people to go out and go to the right spot where they think these plants are going to be, take more pictures, get them identified, and go on from there. So you can see that they're in a variety of habitats, but one of the simplest is El Nogal. That's the nature trail across from Divisadero. Some of you walk your dogs. Dog. I do too, and so there's one down there, and then I had a picture of the seed, as Henk was saying. Seeds are very important. So there's a seed like sticking up off the stem down here, and that's one. Then Missouri milk, do you have a Missouri milkvetch?
Yeah.
Okay, so you'll be able to look at the actual herbarium slide here while I show you this just as a picture. and where I've seen those. So I knew none of these before I put them as iNaturalist. But for me, it's a great learning tool because I then can go back to the keys and say, okay, what is the difference? It's not just color, because you get a lot of color variation in any kind of species. Rushy milkvetch. I found a lot of this in Rinconada and at Fort Burgwin. It's a taller species. This is one that you can see from your car driving past if you were driving past, but really a taller milkvetch. Drummond's is a little bit shorter, but still kind of, you can see it across the street. On the Horseshoe Trail, those of you who drive around the Horseshoe, there's a Forest Service trail that goes up from there. My husband and I hike up there a lot. There's a lot of cactus up there in the spring. Newberry's milkvetch, cute little purple. Little is the operative word. This is much enlarged, but you can see the pubescence on the leaves, and it's kind of a silvery green leaf, but nice little vetch. Freckled milkvetch, and I believe the freckling is on the seed pods, isn't it? Is that why it's called freckled?
I think so, yeah. Mm-hmm.
Again, Rinconada, and here it was, this one was on the west rim. So this gives you an idea as you look at the dried specimens, what some of the colors were, and what's the shape, how tall they are. Cyanic milkvetch, this is probably the one I've seen most often. It's really a pretty color and has this unfolding effect. Almost looks like a vase in some cases. But Dixon mines, you were mentioning the Harding mine. There are a lot of not only astragalus but other unusual plants out in that area around all the mines. And I think it's probably the geology of the soil and being around all of these other minerals that some plants can grow there, some can't. Alpine milkvetch. You can see I saw this at Augustarca every year, almost the same date. It's highly unusual because it's only like 8,000, 8,500 feet high. So what it was doing there, I don't know, but it was very cute, very tiny. It's right at the beginning of the trail, so if it's there, it's there, and as Henk said, this year there's nothing. And then I took this picture in that same meadow right off the Augustarca parking lot, and it was classified by a number of people as unknown. So they sent me this message saying, from this man in Canada, I've concluded this might be an unrecognized variety or species. See discussion here, and they had this whole discussion about what it might be. So if you're in Aguasarca and you see one that's almost white with a little bit of purple inside, with these pointed leaflets, take a picture of it because apparently no one has identified it yet. And that's it for pictures, and then I'm turning it back over to Henk to talk about the herbarium slides.
Thank you.
Yeah, I kind of, I forgot to mention that I have fairly reliably identified 27 species. They're not all here, but they are the most common ones or the more interesting ones. So I don't know how you want to do that. Obviously, you cannot look at them from where you're sitting, so you might want to come over. There's, for instance, this here is the painted milkvetch, and it's a really small, slender species, and it differs from all the other ones in having a long rhizome. It can be that long. So you pull the plant up, and suddenly there's this whole string coming up. All the other ones don't have that. Now, if you have a long rhizome, that won't grow very well in rocky soil because there are too many obstacles. So this thing basically grows in sandy washes. You have a little wash, it's a sandy bank, that's where you can find them. And actually on these specimens you can see why using a key is so difficult for these plants. Because if you take two extremes, like this one has very narrow linear leaves, and you take this one, it has shorter, much wider leaves. So if you have only those two, you can write a key. You can say, okay, you make a description of this one and of that one, and it works. But if you have 20 other ones, 20 other species that differ a little bit, like this one also has linear leaves, but they're a lot shorter. There are other ones like this one has broad leaves but a little hairier. So it becomes really difficult to write a key for such a large number of species. If there were 5 species, that would be nice, but it would not be interesting. But since there are so many, it becomes a puzzle, and see how you can solve, how I could solve them. So this here, this Agrestes, this is a species that also occurs in Asia. So it grows here, it grows all the way north to Alaska, and then crosses over in Asia. Now, I'm not saying that it went from here to Asia or from Asia to here. I'll leave that open. But it is anomalous. It's quite distinct from all the other ones in several characters. Yeah, so I think I have these two laying next to each other. That's a two-grooved milkvetch, and there are 2 varieties of it, and to me they look quite different. But they are the same species according to this one has really slender, long inflorescence, and it's very tightly packed with flowers. This is much looser. Now this variety grows, it's common in the area around Cimarron. You go from Cimarron to Raton along the road, or from Cimarron to Springer. It's everywhere, and until of course Cimarron cuts all the weeds in the roadsides and you don't see it anymore. The other variety doesn't grow there. I've only seen this one there is a forestry road from Cangillon to La Madeira. It goes from Cangillon to Cangillon Lake, and along the road there it's really common. I have not seen the 2 varieties growing together. And these are the most common species, although I must say this one, and I don't trust my identification here. This is completely unknown, and this is unknown. This is a specimen of Newberries, a milkvetch, and Mary showed a picture of it. The really interesting thing about it is the fruits are very distinctive. The fruit are very broad and short, and are very densely pubescent. It's the only species where the fruit is completely covered by the hairs. So you can see that on this one. And flower-wise, to me it looks like any other Astragalus with purple flowers. But the fruits are really distinctive. And then there is another species that has a good character. This one, I don't know what the common name for it is. It's common though. You can see it when you drive along in your car. It looks like all the other ones, but when you dry it, the stipules, you can see it here, the stipules turn black. That's, there's only one species that has stipules that turn black, so you know immediately what it is. Another funny character that they have, the fruits can have a stalk, and so usually the fruits don't have it immediately attached to the remnant of the flower, but like in this one, this has a stalk. You can see that's almost a centimeter long. For this species, it's a good character. And so Um, and this is the one that Mary also showed, Drummondii. It's distinct in having erect hairs. So it's the only species with white flowers. It's rather common. That has spreading hairs. There was another one that I wanted to pick out. So this is the famous stinking milkvetch that I have collected a number of times, and I've never noticed that it was stinking, but that's what the common name is. And then of course it's possible that I've consistently misidentified it, but it just looks like the pictures I've seen, so I think it's correct. And this one has the fruits become almost, when they get old, they become a little woody, and sometimes on old plants, on old stems, you find the fruit from last year persisting. That's really uncommon. So, are there any questions actually? I've been talking about the questions I have, and so would you have any questions? Yes?
Is this poisonous for people?
I think so. I wouldn't eat it. I would stay away from it.
So there's no medicinal purposes for any of these trees?
Astragalus is an enormous genus with 3,000 species. So obviously there is a species from China that is very commonly used as a medicine. I don't know exactly what for, but it's when you Google Astragalus, you get all these references to that particular species from China. So some species have definitely a use, a medicinal use, and some species don't.
I see.
There are 3,000 species, so there's something to be had for everything.
How do you attach it to the paper?
Glue. It sounds simple. That the people who mount the specimens, I don't do that anymore myself. They have a flat sheet, a flat tray with glue, and I just take the specimens and they dip it in, and then I put it on the sheet.
Okay.
And there are other institutions where they don't do that because they don't like glue or whatever. So they kind of sew specimens on it. So they have a needle and a thread, and they go like this and like this. And that's really time consuming. Glue goes much faster. And the herbarium in St. Louis is gigantic. And so they cannot afford to spend time on sewing individual specimens on a sheet of paper. Actually, sometimes they also use a pin. The pin, that herbarium is just strange that they do that. So, yes. Yes?
When you're sending these off, when you're sending specimens
Yeah.
to different places like UNM, is this how you're sending them?
No. No. When I collect two duplicates, one gets mounted in Missouri and the other one stays in the paper and then gets in the paper shipped to various institutions, because we don't know, first of all, what size paper they use. Actually, in the United States, they all use the same size paper, but there are herbaria in Europe where they have sheets like this. I mean, enormous. And so that creates problems. And in one occasion, they were fusing two herbaria, but they had used different size herbarium sheets. So they had a problem. They were thinking, what are we going to do? Are we going to, with a paper cutter, bring these specimens back to size? And they said, no, we cannot do that because they would. So that is a problem. No, but we ship out in paper.
Okay.
Yeah. Yes.
When I think of vetches, I think of nitrogen fixers. Are these nitrogen fixers?
Yeah, they're Fabaceae. I'm sure they are. Mm-hmm. Yeah, and a number actually of the taller species are really good forest plants for cattle and sheep and horses. They're really good. People like that. Yeah, animals like that. But then there are that couple of species that are poisonous, yeah. Yes.
Is it fair to say that these would all be native plants, or
Yes.
some of them have traveled over here from Asia?
No, these are all native here. Yeah. I've tried to grow them in my garden because I like them, but they're not in the trade. And I think a reason for that is I've tried to germinate them too. The germination result from seeds is minimal. And the plants have, as a rule, some species have a taproot, other species have a really deep root. So if you dig them out, you break off the root and you can transplant them and then they die. So they're really hard. So these are all natives. This one, which also occurs in Asia, forms really dense stands. I mean, you find one plant, so you look around and say, oh, there are dozens and dozens and dozens. They're everywhere. And all the ones don't do that. There's just one plant, and that's it. It's near Abukui Lake. I found a plant. I know only one plant, and I don't know what it is. It's different from anything else I've seen. I've collected it twice in consecutive years. I haven't been there this year. But so they don't form colonies. This one also, with the long rhizome, it just creeps along, and here is one plant by itself. And then you have to go a little bit this direction. There's another one by itself. But they never form a clump like these Missouriensis. It's a nice tight clump. So I would say, oh yeah, there's one other one I wanted to mention, Albulus. Most of these Astragalus species flower in spring, and sometimes it lasts a little bit in July, but that basically it's done by that time. But there's of course one species that doesn't do that, and that is this species that grows along the road to the monastery, and it flowers in the summer. You can even find it with flowers in September. In the beginning I didn't know what it was, so I collected it 4 or 5 times trying to find pods. And I could not find pods. And I look at these things and there are old flowers, there should be pods. And it turns out this species has really small pods, and I didn't see them. I mean, I was thinking of pods like what you see here, or what you see here. No, they were completely hidden in the calyx. But it is an unusual species. It's also not very common.